Hi, I'm Andrew Walsh of DaytonVistas.com, and in today's video, we're going to travel back to the early 1900s and take a tour of downtown Dayton, covering a variety of buildings from classically detailed early office towers to simpler business blocks, and even some homes and industrial structures that were all commingled together in different parts of the central business district. This was a time of profound change for downtown as Dayton grew rapidly on the weight of its business and industry, and while we relive the glory days of downtown, we'll also compare the old images to the present day and see what's long gone and what still remains. We'll start with this great shot approaching downtown from the north. The major structure we see is Steele High School, which had the look of a castle and was an imposing presence as one entered downtown on the Main Street Bridge. It opened in 1893 and was Dayton's only high school until 1906. This aerial view gives us a sense of how this northern part of downtown looked in those years. At the time, it was considered far from the city's retail mainstream, which was several blocks south, while here one would find quite a few homes and mostly smaller buildings, aside from the majestic Steele, of course. Another exception is the beautiful 7-story Insco apartment building built in 1894. We can compare this to a modern view where we see that Steele High is no more. It was demolished in 1955 for a parking garage, while today it's occupied by the CareSource building. The Insco Apartments is still there, though, today known as the Riverfront Grand Apartments. I'm going to keep track of our tour route using this map, and next we'll head south from Steele. First, we come across the Herman Building, which was built around 1845 as a warehouse and grain storage facility. It was later occupied by a dry goods store, and after that, the Overland Automobile Company. Beyond that, at the northeast corner of First and Main, we find the Cooper Building, which was erected by John Compton and Daniel Cooper all the way back in 1808. This whole block was demolished in the 1920s for the Biltmore Hotel, which opened in 1929. That still stands today as the Biltmore Towers Senior Apartments. Next, let's continue our walk down Main, where we find a couple of impressive structures at the intersection with First. At the southeast corner, we see the magnificent Victoria Theater, which is Dayton's best example of Second Empire style architecture. It was built as the Turner Opera House in 1866, but that burned down just 3 years later. The rebuilt version was first called the Victoria in 1903, and it once hosted appearances by Buffalo Bill Cody, lectures by Mark Twain and Oscar Wilde, and it first showed talking pictures in 1930. It closed in 1971 and was threatened with demolition, but preservationists banded together to save it, and a 1989 renovation returned many theater elements back to their original appearance. Today, it's still a key venue for Dayton's performing arts. Across Main at the southwest corner, we would see around the turn of the century the Dayton City Club building pictured here. This replaced the mansion of Ebenezer Thresher, a Baptist minister and prominent manufacturer who also co-founded the railroad car company that became Barney and Smith. But in the 1920s, the City Club's home would be demolished for the Harry's building, at the time one of downtown's largest and most luxurious office buildings, which remains today and was recently redeveloped into the Hotel Ardent. Let's now walk another block down Main Street. At the northwest corner of 2nd and Main, we'd find this 4-story building around the turn of the century. It was built all the way back in 1836. In this photo, we can see the Miller's Grocery and Meat Market, and at the top, a sign for the James G. Steele & Co. Annex. The building was raised in 1911, and the Reich Kummler department store was built to replace it, which was a risk at the time because, as I've mentioned, this was far from the center of downtown retail in those days. But Reich's would thrive here and be Dayton's most beloved department store for decades. After it closed, Reich's would be demolished itself in 1999, and the Schuster Center for the Performing Arts was built on the site. Now, looking across Main to the northeast corner, we'd see around the turn of the century a beautiful collection of 19th century commercial buildings. The corner structure was the most prominent. It was known as the Eaker Building, built in 1878 and featuring a gleaming white facade, which was built of buff Amherst stone quarried near Cleveland. It became known as the Cooper Building in 1923 for L.T. Cooper, president of the Cooper Medicine Company. Here's a view from 2nd Street looking back toward Main, with the same corner building circled and Reich's looming behind it. Several of the buildings on this block were Renaissance Revival style, with other styles featured including Eastlake, Northern Italian Mode, and Romano Tuscan. The block was added to the National Register of Historic Places in the 1970s, which by that time was, quote, the only remaining commercial row in the city, which represents the growth of the community during the third quarter of the 19th century. But in the late 80s, the district would be demolished for the Citizens Federal Tower, which later became the Premier Health Tower. Fortunately, the Cooper or Eaker building facade was saved, and we'll see it just a little bit later. But first, we'll go across to the opposite corner, the southwest, and see this scene, which includes a couple of four-story buildings, one of which housed the popular Donnenfeld's clothing store beginning in the 20s, as well as the Gallagher drugstore. We can also see on the left the larger Dayton Savings and Trust building that later was the DP&L Gas and Electric building. These were demolished in the 1970s, and the corner is now occupied by what was until recently called the KeyBank Tower. And this was part of a much larger project. So as we head another block down south on Main Street to see our next landmark, we will find that the whole rest of this block was demolished around it. At the northwest corner of 3rd and Main, we see the old courthouse, built in 1850 and said to be one of the finest examples of Greek Revival architecture in the United States. Its design was modeled on a Greek temple from the 5th century BC, and here we can also see the new courthouse, which was built right next to it in the late 1800s when Dayton outgrew it, and then also the old county jail is visible on the west side. Both of these were demolished for the Courthouse Square project in the mid-70s, which was a combination of a push for public park space and a major business development, which was actually quite controversial and displaced dozens of active businesses. You can see the old courthouse remaining at the corner with a plaza surrounding it, and the tower, which is still Dayton's second tallest building, which was built for the Meade Corporation. And in the middle, behind the two larger buildings, was the downtown home of the Elder Bierman department store. The scene looks much the same today. Next, we'll look across Main Street to the northeast corner, where we find the Callahan Building, considered by many to be Dayton's first skyscraper. The 7-story building was built in 1892. Famous Dayton writer Paul Laurence Dunbar worked there as an elevator operator when he was just starting work on his first volume of poems. The building's clock soon became a major symbol associated with downtown Dayton. The building then went through a major remodel in 1920 when the top was taken out and 7 new floors were built, topped by a new clock tower, which served as a beacon for travelers navigating to the center of the city at night. Here, you can also see the very old, smaller commercial buildings to its left up Main Street. But all of this, including the Callahan, was demolished in the 1970s for the Gem City Plaza, or National City Center, which was designed by a world-renowned architect, Yo-Ming Pei. The clock, still a beloved downtown symbol, was saved, and today it can be found atop a tower at Carillon Historical Park. Now, let's cross 3rd Street to arrive at the Conover Building on the southeast corner of 3rd and Main. An eclectic Renaissance Revival style structure, it was designed by architect Frank Mills Andrews, who also designed NCR's buildings, the Dayton Arcade, and many more. Built in 1900, the Conover Building was expanded a couple of decades later, and unlike the lost Callahan Building, the Conover is still standing. It was renovated and restored to become the new RTA headquarters. And to the left is the saved facade of the Eaker or Cooper building from earlier, moved 1 block south. From here, let's look far down both sides of 3rd Street to see what those parts of downtown looked like. We'll begin by looking east, where we see the Beckel Hotel and the Adler and Childs department store in the foreground. Beyond that, on the other side of Jefferson Street, we see the Fire Blocks, impressive commercial buildings built in the recovery of the Great Flood of 1913. And past that, we can see the trees that were located in Cooper Park around the old public library. And far in the background was a more industrial area where we can see Delco's second factory building. In the modern view, some buildings remain, but others are long gone. Delco's building is still there, for one, and the fire block structures are all still there too, but the corner structure is gone, which had been the home of the Fourth National Bank. Then in the foreground, we can see the old Beckel Hotel, as well as the Adler and Childs locations are today parking lots. Looking west on 3rd Street from Main, we see quite a different scene. So, 3rd Street itself did have businesses, but the western side of downtown was largely a residential area. And in this image, we can see homes and a significant canopy of street trees. When we compare that to the present day, we find that the houses were removed, most of them in a large urban renewal project, and they were eventually replaced by the campus of Sinclair Community College and county court and administration buildings. Of course, we do have a few parking lots thrown in as well. Next, we'll head back to Main Street and begin to look at downtown south of 3rd. We'll first stop in the middle of the block where we find a notable structure, the Central Market House. Built in 1876, it replaced an earlier 2-story market building. In addition to serving as a market, it was also City Hall as well as the headquarters of Dayton's police department. The impressive building went all the way across to Jefferson Street with an identical facade that we can see here. The old market house was demolished in 1958. Today, it's the location of the main bus hub for the RTA, which also runs across the whole block. Back on the Main Street side, just beyond the market house, we would find another prominent structure on the northeast corner of Main and 4th. It looked like this in the early 20th century, and it was known as the United Brethren Building for a prominent publisher of religious books and periodicals. It was expanded and given a tower in the 1920s, and it's still here today, now known as the Center City Building, although it's been vacant for close to 15 years. Recently, however, abatement work began for a major redevelopment project, which is very exciting news for downtown. And it's right across the street from what's been called the crown jewel of Dayton, the Dayton Arcade, which today consists of 9 interconnected buildings spanning the whole block from 3rd to 4th and Main to Ludlow Streets. It opened in 1904 with this ornate Flemish-style building on 3rd Street, the beautiful walkway lined with shops that is the actual arcade, and that continued to a central rotunda, which also served as a market house for downtown. There were also Ludlow and 4th Street buildings, which we'll see in a minute. And the arcade has had a lot of ups and downs over the years, but it was vacant since the early 1990s. Many doubted it would ever open again, but a major redevelopment project has breathed new life into this incredible complex. Now, before we see more of the arcade buildings, let's take a quick detour further south to see the west side of Main between 4th and 5th. This was once the key area for downtown shopping. At the corner, we see the location of the Reich Kummler store from 1893 until it moved to the building we already saw at Main and 2nd. And next to it was another of Dayton's first early towers, the Rybold building. The first portion was built in 1896, and it was the tallest building in Dayton at the turn of the century. An original tenant was the Elder and Johnston department store, which later became Elder Bierman. The second section of the building on the south side was completed in 1905. Then, after Reichs moved, that building was demolished not even 20 years after it was built, and a third part, the Rybold Annex, was constructed. It has gone through some renovations over the years, but the 3-part Rybold is still there and is used by the county. Now, on our way, you may have noticed this nice building across 4th Street, so let's head back that way before heading west. It's the Coons Building at the northwest corner of 4th and Main. It was completed in 1883, so it predates the arcade by 2 decades, although it is now considered part of the redeveloped complex. It's in the Romanesque Revival style with distinctive red brick, a mansard roof, and rounded arches. Its tower was destroyed by a fire in 1947, but the building is still an imposing presence at the corner today. We'll now go west on 4th to see the intersection of 4th and Ludlow. At the northeast corner, we see the commercial building, which became part of the arcade when it was completed in 1908. On each side of it, you can see the Ludlow Street and 4th Street arcade buildings, which today house apartments on the upper floors and ground floor restaurant and other business spaces. Across Ludlow, we see another architectural gem at the northwest corner, the Dayton Daily News building. This Beaux Arts style building was built in 1910 by James M. Cox, who needed a larger facility for his growing newspaper, which he'd bought in 1898. It still stands today, but is in a precarious state after a botched redevelopment and subsequent legal dispute. It's open to the elements and quickly deteriorating and is a major issue of concern for local preservationists. Across 4th on Ludlow Street, we find another interesting block, which we'll look at from both directions. Looking south toward 5th, a variety of businesses occupied these buildings when this was part of a bustling downtown district. We can see here the Metropolitan Clothing Company, and later Wilkie's Bookstore would also be located around here. These buildings are still standing but are wrapped up in an exterior finish and insulation system put into place by Reynolds and Reynolds in the 80s. Heading down to the other end of the block and looking back north up Ludlow from 5th, we would see another active street scene. So the theater building in the foreground to the left is gone. It was replaced by a church, but the majority of the rest of the block is still there. We can see the tallest of those wrapped up buildings on the left, and it is worth noting that Reynolds and Reynolds also renovated the 5-story structure in the foreground to the right, known as the Ludlow building, with its richly decorated upper stories. From here, we'll walk back east on 5th toward Main. This had become a more fringe area of downtown, occupied by furniture makers, wholesalers, jewelry and shoe stores, smaller theaters, and other odds and ends, most of which had apartments above. We're actually looking toward one of the largest urban renewal areas of downtown, where all that I mentioned was replaced by the convention center, an attached hotel, and transportation garage. Continuing on to the northeast corner of 5th and Main, we see a dense block with some interesting old commercial structures as well as a church on Main Street that today is one side of the Levitt Concert Pavilion with the hotel behind it. Right across 5th, we would see the Pruden block at the corner, a mid-Victorian style structure which was built in 1878 and said to be the first major commercial building of extensive size in Dayton. Next to it was the Gebhardt Building, originally opened as the Gebhardt Opera House in 1877. It was later known as the Park, Lyric, and Mayfair Theaters, which in 1950 became a burlesque theater until it closed in 1968. Both of these buildings, and more around them, were demolished after that, and this block is today occupied by the Convention Center. Now, if you're not already exhausted from our tour, I'm going to make us walk our farthest distance all the way over here at 6th around Ludlow and Wilkinson Streets, but I promise it'll be worth it. And that's because we're here to see Dayton's beautiful Union Station, which included a 7-story clock tower. It opened in 1900, replacing an earlier depot with a round top that was located right next to it. The last passenger train in Dayton ran in 1979, and today, many of the same tracks are still used for freight rail. And there has been some recent momentum to try to push for a return of passenger train service to Dayton that would link up with other Ohio cities. From Union Station, we'll go back to Main Street, where we'll wrap up our tour. At the northeast corner of 6th and Main, we would see this scene with the old National Hotel at the corner. It was also known as the Anthony House for proprietor Anthony Greiner. Today, it's the back of the convention center we saw earlier, and 6th Street is not even a through street around here anymore. We're now right at the southern border of downtown, where we'll make one last stop before calling it a day. On the east side of Main, we see a series of residential structures surrounding an architectural gem, the Eagles Building, built in 1916 as a meeting hall for the Fraternal Order of Eagles, and today listed on the National Register. All the structures surrounding it have been removed, but it still stands and is being used by the City Day Community School. So that wraps up our tour, and I hope you enjoyed this look into downtown Dayton's past and seeing what still remains. If you're interested in Dayton history, be sure to sign up for my newsletter where I share my Dayton writing, as well as my upcoming presentations and walking tours. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.